Hi, and welcome to another Rigonomicon.com video. Today we're going to be going over some basic cloth physics. And there's going to be two videos, one for soft body and another one for rigid body type of physics. And sometimes cloth sim and physics simulations can be really handy and help you out for certain shots. It also depends on the style. Because, like, for example, I worked on Demon Slayer, the video game, and we didn't want to have any form of simulation because it kind of clashed with the art style and it didn't really match. So we made sure it was animated by hand. And for anything that flowed like that. Although eventually, I believe after I left, there was some people that added. Some colleagues of mine were able to put in some physics that did not clash with the art direction, and eventually that worked out. But if you are working on something where cloth physics, for example, is something valuable to you and you could use it, uh, this video is for you. You're going to be able to do some cloth physics with this. And so I figured, what is one of the most common things that causes a lot of grief, and that's things like skirts, because they can break and they're very large and a lot of things can happen. So I figured, you know what, let's give our stormtrooper here basically a skirt that I modeled, and let the stormtrooper dance and see how that skirt reacts to it. So that's a good challenge. And this mesh is modeled in the form of I modeled it so that it's similar to a real skirt, where if you open up a like you look at the like a seamstress design for a skirt, it looks like this a little bit, and usually there's the point where you sew it together and all that. That's not important for us today. The important thing is that this is similar to what a skirt is, and if we do our job right here with the physics, it should drop down and create the illusion of cloth that works like a skirt. There is the other option that some people take, depending on if you're working in games or you want to optimize so you don't have cloth physics. You can do is also create a skirt that's already got the proper shape, and then put bones in it. So like chains of bones, like a ponytail. Just have multiple ponytails going around the skirt, and then have some physics on the bones themselves, not on the vertices. In this case, we're going to be simulating each vertice, and then that will be stored as keys for per vertex. Okay, so there are other ways of doing this, but I'm going to use the cloth sim one, which is generally the one that causes a lot of grief for a lot of people. Normally, I might start putting categories for film, like any of these videos that are very specific to a software like Maya. I might start putting them into different categories because most of what I've been showing on the Rigonomicon.com has been software agnostic, meaning it doesn't matter which software you're using, you have an equivalent to what I've been showing. But in this case, this is very specific to Maya, so you may not have the same setup over there if you're using Blender or Max or whatever it is that you're using. But hopefully there's something here that's still useful to you. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is turn on this little feature here, which is where it stores the animation into a cache. Okay, the short of this is there's a lot of videos out there that are clickbaity that go that say something like my animation go burr now, and it's like, the reality of it is this is just a cache. Okay, so it still has to pre-calculate a whole bunch of stuff and put it into a cache, meaning you might not want to use that when you're animating just a normal character. If your rig is so heavy that you can't see your animation in real time, there's something wrong with your rig. You really need to go back to just follow what I've been all the golden rules and the setups that I've been showing you. You should be fine. Especially if you use like the plugins that I've been providing from Rigonomicon.com. There's a couple of plugins in there that optimize certain constraints and certain things, and the setups should be very friendly to your frame rate. But if you're using something that requires a cache, there's something wrong with your rig, or it's not meant to be animated in real time. And you should maybe using a proxy rig. But for simulation, I think this feature in particular is absolutely wonderful. So because it's going to pre-cache our simulation and then store it, so we get a good frame rate, and we can play back our animation with the full simulation. However, we're going to be fighting it all the time because every time we change something, it has to recalculate the simulation. So keep that in mind. And also note this little button and the ability to cache animation is great and all, but there's a lot of tools and things that broke as a result. In fact, in the second video, when I'm going to be talking about the rigid body simulation, there's a lot of tools that no longer work. So I'm going to do some workarounds and find alternative methods to get rigid body simulation into Maya. At least as of 2024, that button, that feature, it has knocked out a number of systems, especially anything that has to do with visualization of shapes. Any plugin that you have that has its own shape probably doesn't work well. Okay, so with all that said, we're going to, the actual setup is going to not take us very long, okay? So at least there's that. Hopefully I didn't drone on too long, but there was a lot of information there that is absolutely necessary to understand what we're doing here. Okay, so now that we have this mesh that is friendly to a simulation for a skirt, we also will have I have a layer here already ready, and there are these orange pants. They are modeled the same way that I guess you could say like Virtua Fighter 1 type of modeling. Only it's soft instead of faceted. But anyways, point is, these meshes are nothing that needs explaining. It's just a sphere, and I moved vertices really more than anything, and I made them so that their volumes are enough to cover most of the armor. There's I don't know, maybe there's some things we could do to make this a little bit easier, a little better. But for the most part, with this, we should be good. And because we're not going to use something like the skeleton, I found out for my students that this actually really slowed things down. So having, depending on the computer that you have, so again, with optimizations, let's go ahead and make some very simple meshes that we're going to use for collision with the skirt. And it's simple enough that it's enough to handle the volume, but at the same time, it's not heavy for calculations. There's not a lot of vertices moving here, and it's definitely not a skinned mesh, which is even worse. So life is good. All right, so also one thing to note is these meshes have been parented to the joint that corresponds to that area. So that way, when the character starts dancing, they will move. These parts will move. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, for the simulation, I need to have something as a reference that's physical. Because right now, as far as simulations go, it doesn't have anything to work with because you haven't told it what is going to be used for the simulation. So right now, there's nothing. So the first thing we're going to do is just tell the simulation to use these objects as passive colliders. And a passive collider is basically something that doesn't simulate on its own, like gravity won't affect it. It'll just physically be there, and it can't be affected, but it affects other things. So the skirt will not go beyond the volume of these pants. All right. So all we're going to do is we're going to go into the FX section of Maya, and our menus are going to change. The quickest thing I can do to explain is you can rely on anything that has an N in front of it. Like all things in Maya, a lot of plugins got brought in. One of the things that got added was the nucleus tools. That's what the N stands for. So like if I go to nCloth, for example, with those pant parts selected, I can create a passive collider. Don't worry about the options for this because we can always modify them later. But we're going to create passive collider with all these pants. And you're going to notice for each one of these pieces, it created an N rigid object. And it also created the nucleus tool. Okay, real quick on this one too. It's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff we have to talk about beforehand before we click any buttons because we need to understand what's going on. So gravity is set to 9.8. And just consider that for a second. 9.8 what? That's the first question you should ask yourself. What is 9.8? It's a measurement of what? How does gravity get measured this way? And it's 9.8 meters per second squared, if ever you've done any physics. And I'm bringing this up because the default sizes for Maya, if you look at the grid, there for each one of these points on the grid, and intersections. It's basically a length of 1, and it's just a generic unit of measurement. It's 1. And if you're bringing this into an engine, you're going to find that this character who, is a height of 18 units, and that's like the default Maya settings because, those numbers are nice to work with, and that's why they put it like that. But because it's a weird number like that, it gets brought into an engine, and then the engine, for the most part, most engines work in centimeters. All right, and so this character would be 18 centimeters tall. That's a very small character, right? Even if you're used to inches, 18 inches isn't very much, but in metric, 18 centimeters is a very tiny character. And if your gravity is working at 9.8 meters per second per second squared, you have to consider that 18 centimeters gravity would be very different than if you were big. So think of Ant-Man. Okay, if he's a little tiny character, like imagine he's the size of an ant, and he spits or something, or just throws something. The distance that gets traveled is very small. So gravity is different when you're really tiny because there's very few distance, like there's not much distance for things to travel. So it doesn't have much to accelerate. It doesn't have a lot of distance to travel to accelerate. And since it's a kind of a constant 9.8 meters per second squared, if you're small, that object will not impact the ground with much force. In fact, everything's very floaty when you're tiny. And if you're really, really big, the impacts are much bigger, simply because there's more distance for it to fall. Okay, so in our case, that's going to be a problem for the cloth, because if it's set to meters per second squared, I know it's in meters, but the measurement, for whatever reason, most softwares is still centimeters under the hood. So at 18 centimeters, we have a problem. Now, we could switch that gravity to 98, I think is mathematically correct because it's nonlinear, right? So it's hard to, I think the math would work, but it's still, from what I've seen, might be a little too much. So, and here's the thing, you can fudge the numbers a little bit to, like as an artist, like as a tech artist, I try to follow the science, but I also fudge the numbers for the art if it looks right. And since we want to make a flowy, dress, I'm going to set that to, instead of 98, I'll set it to 60. So it's a little less than what you'd expect. And generally I find that, doing those kind of shenanigans is okay, but just keep them in mind when you're doing those kind of changes. All I know is that for now, because this character is small, it could not be left at 9.8 because then it would not move at all, because that character is too tiny for gravity to do its thing. At what we're expecting at our size, we're expecting gravity to react based on our size, so that's not going to work. Okay, so we've made our peace with gravity, so that should be good enough. Now the thing that we need to do is make this mesh now understand that it is cloth. So I'm just going to go to nCloth, and I'm going to say create nCloth. That's it. And now you're going to see that there's the simulation is kicked in. It's pre-calculating so that I can actually see the reaction. All right, so yeah, we didn't tell it to hold on to anything, right? It doesn't know how to hold on, so it's simulating for the cloth. And one of the things you're going to notice is that it's already taking the shape of the rigid body that we defined earlier, so we're already in business except for the fact that it shouldn't be dropping like that. So how do we pin it? So it's actually quite simple. Because we have something that we can use that's considered rigid body and the simulation understands what that is, I can select the mesh. I can go to vertex mode, select any, I made this belt here so that we can just click on any vertex, like in the middle, and then shift double click the neighbors, and it should do a full loop. And then if I press shift period, you should be able to grow your selection. So now I have 3 loops of the vertices. Now here's a little tip, because now what we need to do is multi-select a rigid body while we have these vertices selected. And if you do it like this, you're going to shoot through it, and it's going to prioritize selecting vertices because you've got vertice selection going. So in order to help yourself out, just angle the camera so you don't have anything of the skirt behind you, and you can clearly select the rigid body, which is the around the waist. And we're going to basically lock these vertices onto that rigid body so that the simulation does not affect these vertices, and the vertices attached to them that are attached to them will simulate without stretching or minimal stretching. So let's go to nConstraint, right? It's these are all part of a package for Nucleus. If you go to point to surface, it's basically going to do exactly what I just mentioned. It's going to take those vertices and it's going to lock it onto a surface. Now the visuals for this are a pain in the butt, so I'm just going to select it here, press H, I'm going to hide it, we don't need it. And now if we look at our timeline, you're going to notice that, sure, it's working. But the cloth is very elastic. It feels very bouncy. So we need to change what kind of cloth it is. It's just using the default. If I go to the attribute editor and I go to the nCloth shape, there's a little button here that says presets, which barely anyone ever uses. You can press that button and it will give you all the presets for the different kinds of cloth and material that you could have with nCloth. And you can make your own, but for now we're just going to focus on silk here. And I'm going to replace the one that it currently has with it. And it's even got a little note on how silk works, and it's not very stretchy, so that's the important thing. And also it should flow nicely when we have some momentum. So now if we look at our animation, you're going to notice that the stretch has been dropped, and we also have some very nice clean shapes that are coming through here. This is pretty realistic. Now we do have some collision issues here and there, but like I mentioned, those are little things that you can fix by changing either the collision objects or simply pushing a little bit more on or making the collision objects bigger, or having the outer shell of collision detection be a bit wider. There's all kinds of little tricks you can do for that kind of stuff. Okay, so now that we have this, as far as setup goes, even though I've been talking a lot, the setup has actually been pretty good. We have almost everything we need. And at this point, I'm even going to hide the orange pants. And now we're just going to bring in animation and see how that works. All right, so it's easier said than done because there is a little thing that's very Maya specific again that I need to address. So I'm just going to first import. I'll do that again because it looks like I clicked on the other thing here. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to bring in the mocap graceful. It's a graceful animation. And we can see our character here. It starts at 0 and is animating quite nicely. And we want to transfer that to the character. I've done the human IK work already, so it's easy to transfer. And there's no rig on this, so it's just going to be super easy. StormTrooper HIK has been set here, and I'm just going to bring in our mocap source. If you don't know, you're not too familiar with this stuff, please look at some of the other videos I have, especially the one for transferring motion capture to or any animation from another rig onto your character without breaking the rig. You'll know that you have the right video when you're looking at Gangnam Style. So mocap source, I'm going to bring in. Okay, so now we have. It's okay. It's just that it needs to simulate now. Okay, so first thing, see, like I was saying before, this little button sometimes actually slows you down because it's actually caching all the animation first before it caches the simulation. So you're basically sitting there waiting constantly for that. And we'll see once the animation's done, the skirt should pop into place. And unfortunately, if you look at the animation, the character starts moving before the cloth would be able to set. So normally what I would do, and this is what I was getting at, is that when you select like the root node for the animation or the source of animation, then you go select hierarchy, and you have all these nodes that have all of these keys. In Maya, moving these keys can actually crash your Maya. I'm serious. I've seen some pretty bad things going on with this. The animation editing keys part of Maya has not been multi-threaded in any way, so it's not using the parallel processing that the nodes have in the dependency graph node editor, which is a big deal because only one of your cores, CPU cores, is actually doing all the work, and in some cases, for my students, it crashed their systems, and they weren't able to get control of their computer again, and we had to reboot. It's pretty bad. So normally what I'd do is I'd move these keys 100 frames forward and give it enough time for the cloth to come down. But that's not going to be good enough here, because you might have a computer like the ones we have in the schools and it might crash. Hopefully the version of Maya that you have has been updated so that it doesn't do that. So what I'm going to do now is just going to hide the skeleton. And I'm going to go to the nucleus node again that had, we changed the gravity. And there's another thing in there where instead of moving keys, what we're going to do is we're going to tell it, start the simulation earlier. So right now, the start frame is set to 1. We're going to set it to -100. One of my students found this, and we were able to move forward with the class exercise. So don't worry about that. It's normal. Basically, we're going to have to set Maya 2 to -100. So a lot of things are going to be recalculated very soon. Here we go. So now it's going backwards. It's calculating. It's caching backwards. So we're going to go to frame -100. And at least the animation didn't take too long to cache, but the simulation now has time to come down before the animation kicks in. So sometimes doing these shenanigans means you should, there's a button here, you can right click and you can go flush cache in case there's some weird stuff happening where it's doing this kind of Frankenstein thing, and it doesn't work out too well. But we should be okay at this point. So we're gonna just take a quick gander, see if this is working. That dropped down nicely. Okay, and then we have plenty of. See, it didn't do the thing. Aha! So we're gonna have to do it after all. Flush cache, and then we're just gonna have to wait for it to go through all that. See, so. Animation Go Burr, it was a very hopeful thing by those streamers. The fact that you have to now cache animation in order for your simulation to also work kind of slows things down, frankly. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of engineering on the Autodesk side for this to work, because every version there's more stuff that works with it, because a lot of things got knocked out and broke. So just keep that in mind. With every version of Maya, it's going to get better. So that's the good news. And there are certain scenarios where this really does come in handy. So, okay, so now it's finished the animation caching. And now it's starting the simulation. So one thing is when you move you scrub your timeline, you're pausing the simulation because it has to update based on what you're doing. And that's taking away from the simulation from happening. But so far, it looks like it's going well. And now let's see what happens when we get to frame 0. It looks like it's fine. All right. So in a way, I'm glad that happened, because if you're seeing this problem, just like I was mentioning, you just flush it and make it recalculate, and that whole Frankenstein scenario doesn't happen. So we're gonna just let it go for a little bit more, and then we're gonna see. We're gonna be. I think it's gonna be mission accomplished when it comes to the skirt, with the exception of some clipping that's happening. Like around here, there's a little bit, and I noticed on the back of the leg there was a bit. So we can, these are things that we can fix little by little. So let's take a look from frame 0. See how we're doing here. Oh, that's nice. It's very frilly. That's beautiful. So we're doing pretty good, actually, and that has a nice shape to it. It's got a nice weight. I'm probably going to use something over around here for the thumbnail. Yeah, that's a perfect thumbnail. There we go. Ole. So yeah, so this is how you set up this kind of cloth physics for, if you're doing, you can use this for so many things. But skirts are usually one of the worst things to set up. But with this method, for at least per vertex simulation, you can get something that looks pretty decent. With Maya now, it's pretty good with the nCloth. It's pretty good for that kind of stuff. For the stuff that I'm going to be doing in the next video that is related to rigid bodies, meaning I can stop it here for the video for this thing, and I'm just going to talk about real quick basically what a StormTrooper Normally the Stormtrooper has these little things on the side of their belt. We're gonna do a rigid body sim on those so that they flap around. I removed it for the skirt because they were getting in the way for the for this subject. So we're gonna have those little Stormtrooper things on the belts, and then we're gonna see multiple methods. And like I mentioned before, this evaluation manager that's been added that deals with caches and like pre-computing things and putting it into a place where it speeds up playback. That kind of thing kind of knocked out some of these other ones. Like for example, the one that doesn't have the N in front of it over here, field solvers. These, it even says it, legacy rigid bodies. The second that you touch any of this, it's going to give you a warning and put a big exclamation mark on this. And it's not for show. It's for real. It's seriously. Right now, this whole section here is busted, and we're going to have to use something else other than that. So I'm going to, in the next video, I'll show you what your alternatives are. All right, so let's just take a look at the animation. Call it. We're going to call this video done. Hopefully, this has helped you set up a cloth physics setup, and you should be able to make Stormtroopers dance elegantly with a skirt, which is something I don't think anybody would have imagined me saying. All right, so that's pretty good with the exception of the hands going in there. We'd have to fix some of the animations. Anyways, point is, mission accomplished, I think. We have cloth sim, everything's good. And please take a look at the next video for rigid body.